Prime Minister Modi, why don't you take questions from the freest press in the world? This is one question that has created an absolute media mayhem back in India and also ignited a political storm. It was a young Norwegian journalist, Helle Lyng, who sought to ask this question when the Prime Minister was on a 5 day visit to Europe. She didn't get the answer. Prime Minister Modi walked out with his Norwegian counterpart. Post that, the Ministry of External Affairs specially invited the Norwegian journalist to their press conference. And there, what unfolded was an unprecedented confrontation between the Ministry of External Affairs officials and the young Norwegian journalist. This incident has also brought back to focus the shrinking space for press freedom back in India. Is this really a cause for concern? Do we need a Norwegian journalist to remind India of the importance of a vibrant, democratic, free press? And more importantly, who is this Norwegian journalist? Why is she now being called a propagandist and a Congress stooge? What are her credentials? And what does this incident teach us about the kind of reflection that we need to do as Indians, as independent journalists, as media, as free-thinking citizens? Helle Lyng now joins me live on Peak TV. Thanks very much, Ms. Lyng. Really appreciate you being with us here on Peak TV. My first question to you, did you really anticipate this kind of response? You know, your video on Twitter now has about 11 million views. Everybody from mainstream media to independent journalists to drawing rooms, everybody is discussing what happened in Norway thanks to that one question you sought to ask Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Did you anticipate this kind of response?
Never even in my wildest imagination could I have anticipated it. I thought when I posted it on X, I did want to reach the Indian audience because I'm usually more on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, but I know that you don't have the same opportunity to go on TikTok, so that's why I would put it on X, and then it exploded from the start, really.
And Ms. Lyng, the kind of response that you've received is also characterized by this great backlash. You've yourself gone on record and said that you've been at the receiving end of some absolutely ruthless trolling, abuse. Your accounts on Facebook and Instagram stand suspended as well. Is this kind of abuse and trolling new for a Norwegian journalist? Have you ever experienced this? And what do you make of the kind of abuse that you've received in the past couple of days?
Well, yeah, it's completely new to me, especially the very intense campaign, I guess, to kick me out of Meta and Meta's platforms, Facebook and Instagram, which they did succeed in, but Meta and Facebook has restored my profiles. Thank you, Meta, for that, and hopping on quickly to do
So you're
so.
saying your Facebook profile has been restored?
Yes. So within,
Okay.
I think it got closed on Tuesday around 8 or 9 p.m. Norwegian time. And then yesterday, I don't remember the exact time, it was restored again. And at first I had some problems logging in and out, but then I think that Facebook and Instagram both have taken some actions to make sure that if there are a lot of people trying to report my account, that it doesn't just get automatically shut down.
Right. So that's good news, actually, that your Facebook account has been
Yes, that's a very
restored
good news.
because we're all on social media platforms, and we need these platforms to be as free as possible for us to be
Yes.
able to report. Uh, uh,
And that's a
but
good
Ms. Lyng,
point, just
yes,
if I can say
yeah,
something on that.
go ahead.
That's a really good point because I still want to ask Meta and Facebook, or Facebook and Instagram, sorry, and Meta, the parent company. I think for me, um, since I now have this traction online, maybe it was easier to get my accounts back. So this still raises a question with a lot of journalists doing hard work in India. If they are targeted in these types of campaigns, how easily do they get their accounts back?
That's actually a very important point you're raising, Ms. Lyng, there, because we face takedowns ourselves. Two of our posts have been taken down, but there are a lot of smaller journalists as well, and smaller in the kind of very limited sense, because there are people in small cities, towns, etc., who really do the hard work of taking on the local strongmen, the sand mafia, and the contractors, etc. And they're only the only space they have to reach people are these social media platforms. So it's really important that these platforms remain free. And like you said, that the ones who get the traction online, it's easier for them to get their accounts restored. But these smaller journalists never really see the light of day. But coming back to what we were talking about earlier as well, Ms. Ling, that you said that your family was also targeted, in this kind of vile, vicious slander campaign, like you said, in the past couple of days.
Well, yeah, more that at least people are talking to me. And for example, a message I got was, I hope your family gets nuked. So it's more like those types of messages that are very mean and have violence in them, that are also not only talking about me, but my family. But I'm pretty sure that it's just trolling and that it won't. Nothing mean will come out of it, you know.
Yes. Keeping the abuse aside and addressing some of the criticisms that you've faced back
Yes.
home here in India, one of the biggest criticisms is that you've emerged out of nowhere. That Helle Lyng was not active on Twitter. She barely had any followers, and there she is with this one video becoming an overnight sensation, being talked about. Where did she come from? How has she emerged from nowhere? Should we even take her seriously? Because she was nowhere to be seen before this incident. What is your response to that criticism?
It's kind of funny how the same people that criticize me for being a small reporter, or back in the days I was a small reporter, now I'm just, well, I'm a commentator now and working with my audience in Norway. But the same people that criticize me for being coming out of nowhere is also the same people that criticize me for taking up the space now that I have it. So it's a little bit of a contradiction there. But what I will say to that is that during my 5 years of reporting, I never, in my stories about anything from Norwegian economy to US reports back in 2024 when I was covering the election, I didn't really put myself too much into the story. But today and yesterday and Monday and Tuesday, it is the Indian media and also international media that made the story about me. And I also welcome that, because it has been able to also lift a discussion of press freedom onto Indian channels that might not be able to criticize their Indian prime minister.
That's an interesting point to make, because one of the editorials I was reading this morning about you was that journalists should never become the story. And this was a very senior journalist who wrote this editorial, and a respected one here in India. And she says that while she champions the cause of press freedom, she has a problem with the journalist becoming the story. What do you have to say to that?
I follow the argument. I will be reading that editorial later. So again, I would have liked it when I posted that clip. I didn't post it with my take on what happened. I posted the clip, and I also followed up with a clip of my prime minister, 3 clips in total, where I also push back on him for us, Norway, our state, calling India a democracy when there's no free press. And I didn't need to be the story in this, and that's it's not me making the articles about me, you know.
Yes.
I became the story because I asked the question, and the question has sparked controversy in India. So that's the way I see it. I didn't. It's not me pitching myself to all these Indian publications.
Hmm.
But I
The
welcome
point I
them.
was making earlier and the question I asked you about the credentials, the suggestion seems to be from many quarters within the media and the political circles that you are an opposition plant, as it were, that you are, you have been given money or you're getting something out of it, and you've been planted there by the Indian opposition to create this kind of stir at the Prime Minister's press briefing. And this entire argument was further fueled by you following just the Congress party on your social media. So, what do you have to say about that? Because in India right now, there is, of course, a bitterly polarized environment, at least politically, where you have, say, the BJP ecosystem refusing to speak to the Congress ecosystem, and they're just not seeing eye to eye. But what do you have to say about people calling you a Congress plant and opposition stooge, and that there is some kind of conspiracy and something surreptitious about you asking that question in the press briefing?
I didn't have any contact with Gandhi or any of his party members before I went to that press conference. I am the only thing I've tried to do afterwards, and after he retweeted me, was to see if he would sit for an interview with me, because then I would have also asked him critical question and question, okay, let's say you one day become the most powerful person in India, how will you secure press freedom? How will you roll back some of the um, some of the policies that your predecessor has rolled out? So that
Have you
wouldn't be a
succeeded in that?
softball
Because
interview at all.
a lot of people here in India also argue that while, of course, Prime Minister Modi has never done a press conference, he has never taken questions in a press conference. He did one back in 2019, but didn't take any questions in that press conference either. The argument also is that the Gandhis, who are the principal opposition party, the Congress, they are equally uptight, they're equally sort of equal champions of censorship. And Ms. Rahul Gandhi also hasn't done any real interview in the past couple of years, except for talking to influencers, etc. So, have you been lucky in getting, in hearing from Mr. Gandhi at least?
No, I've not heard from him or his team, and I assure anyone watching this that if he were to reach out, he would also be getting tough questions from me about these allegations that you're bringing.
Okay. Another aspect to the criticism you have faced is that many people back here in India, many news organizations also have said that or have hinted at the possibility of you being Soros funded or you being a pro China propagandist. How do you respond to that? Because that is something a lot of journalists here in India hear as well. Whenever they write something or talk about something that is critical of the government, they are branded anti-national or Soros funded. But how do you respond to being labeled a pro-China propagandist? In fact, we are showing that cutout from Op India, which is a pro RSS kind of a news organization. I don't even know if you can call them a news organization, but they've labeled you a pro China propagandist. And the article says pro China propagandist Helle Lyng admits on camera that journalists were told not to ask questions. I'll come to that part later. But what do you have to say
Yeah.
about this pro China propagandist tag?
Okay, so these are serious and undocumented allegations coming from a press that I guess just think they can just put out anything and make any accusations without having any sort of documentation for it. I've I have nothing to do with the Chinese government. If Xi Jinping came to Norway and also did a press conference with my prime minister, I would also ask him to do the question, ask him to get a question, or at least I would try. And yeah, I have no ties to Soros too. The only one that is funding my journalism is my employer, and Earlier this year, I had another employer that funded my journalism, and that's the only uh, employers I have had this year.
Okay. Also, you talked about the quote unquote press conference and this entire argument that it was a press briefing and not a press conference, and that journalists were told before the briefing even began that there will be no questions from the press. How do you respond to that argument that when you already knew that this is not a press conference, this will be a one-way communication, this will be a one-way press briefing, then doesn't what you did, tantamount to heckling? That's what a lot of people here are saying, that because journalists were already told that this is going to be a one-way press briefing, why did she have to go and heckle the prime minister there? After all, she knew that there will be no questions from the press.
Yeah, I just in general disagree on the premise, and it's not my job to accept the premise of a foreign leader and my prime minister when they invite the press to a press brief or press conference. We come to this press brief or press conference. You can call it what you want, but it is my job and my duty as a reporter back in the day and as a commentator today to try to hold the powerful accountable. And Moody is definitely one of the people in the world that should be held accountable to a much more extent than he is today. And it's especially important now, given that our two nations will be cooperating. We will be contributing to expanding India's economy. You will contribute to expanding Norway's economy. We we have got to be able to also question the powers that we cooperate with. And
Hmm.
I would have
In
done it through diplomatic channels if I thought there was a chance that Moody would sit for a 10 to 15 interview with me or even just 2 minutes. But I knew that wouldn't be the case. So I knew that the press conferences that I was invited to and had been accredited to would be my only opportunities. But I also understand that in the confrontational journalism or direct journalism is probably upsetting to some that hasn't seen it in many years.
Interesting that you also say that Prime Minister Modi must be held accountable much more than he is currently. Why do you say that? Why do you say that? Because a lot of people argue, and a lot of people have said that you lack an understanding of India. Uh, Tell us what you think of India generally, and tell us what you think of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. What is the general impression in journalistic circles, say in Norway, about India, about the state of the press in India, about our leadership, just to sort of answer those people who say that you lack understanding. Because while of course nobody expects you to know the history, geography, and everything about the country, but just to understand from you, what is the general impression that you and the likes of you have about India and our leadership?
So I'm glad you bring it up because I want to be very clear that I don't want to lecture anyone on the history of India or the political system or any of that sort. I'm looking forward to, now that I have met, well, I've met a lot of Indians this week and I've talked to a lot of Indians, and I get a lot of messages. So I'm very much looking forward to researching the country even further. Before all of this week happened, and I was doing my research for Moody's visit to Norway, I was relying on international reports, human rights violations, also reading coverage from independent journalists, also Amnesty, of course, those organizations I trust. So that's what I rely, and also, of course, Norwegian. It's eeasier for me to read in
But what are some of
Norwegian.
these human rights violations that you're talking about? Just to be slightly more specific.
I will, let's see. I really, if it's okay with you, I would like to answer that question, but I also then would like my fact sheet, so then I can come back to your show next week when I've had some more sleeps to make sure that I don't say anything that's incorrect.
No,
So for,
why
and
I
also
ask
for
you
me,
that is because,
but can I reply, please?
sure,
Because
sure, please, please, go ahead.
I have not made this discussion to be about uh, any sort of specific event in India. I've made this discussion to be about press freedom and human rights violations. And I'll be the first to say that there's a lot of other people that know a lot of more about that than I do. So that's why I also will not be uh, going into back and forth about this with also the Indian state channels tried to do this with me yesterday too. And I'm very honest that I have a lot to learn. So, but and when it comes to press freedom, that's kind of what my discussion is and my point of view. And the
So
only thing
you're
I really,
essentially saying that you might not know a lot about India, and you're willing to learn more about India, but that's not what your moot point is. Your
yes.
point is that any head of state, any leader who comes to your country should be open to questions from the foreign press.
Yes, I definitely agree that I have a lot to learn about India, and I will be putting a lot more time in the future than I have in the past to uh, really understand Indian history and also how India has changed under Modi, and not just rely on international reports. And I will also be
Yeah.
looking more into events that has taken place to learn more. But yeah, my that's also my only focus this week throughout the week has been about press freedom and also reports about human rights violations. And let's say I did get a 15-minute interview with the prime minister, we would have had to go much more into um, more specific topics. And I would have done a lot of extensive research on that if that would have been
Yeah.
the case. And Prime Minister Modi is, of course, always welcome to join me on X at any moment.
Why I asked you that, Ms. Lyng, is because while you did not want the discussion to become about how much Western media knows about India, that unfortunately or fortunately is the discussion back home. Because I'll try and explain to you where this comes from. There is a deep seated belief among some sections of people in India that Western media and international journalists for long have tried to portray India as this socially primitive land, as this land where there are no human rights, as this land where there's no understanding of the world. And that deep seated belief gets triggered the moment such incidents happen, particularly on foreign soil, which is why a lot of people say that these are people. These people are part of this larger ecosystem. That ecosystem might or might not exist, but the belief is that such people are part of that ecosystem who want to tarnish the image of India. In fact, I'll put out that
Can I
cartoon
just say some
also.
one thing?
Sure,
Because
please.
I do want to answer your question. But I also run a little low on battery, just so you know, in case my phone dies. Um,
Sure, sure. So go ahead and answer
so
that.
um, I also think that's a very important perspective and constructive criticism that I will be bringing back here to Norway. That's the cartoon you're showing now is not my
Yes.
newspaper's cartoon, so
Yes.
I can't respond to that. They also tried to
Yes.
get me to respond to that yesterday, and I have not put myself into that whole situation unfolding because I just had so much of my own the last 3 days. But back to your question, I do think the criticism there is valid, that we in the West do really need, now that we're also going to be working a lot closer together and India is strengthening their position on the world scene, we need to learn more, and that's also our duty. So I come from that from a very open, I minded. I That criticism I take.